Hey, Slate Church, Pastor Steve, Pastor Dustin here. This week is the Passion Week of Jesus Christ, and we wanted to talk with you about it a little bit. The idea of passion talks about the strong desire and strong suffering that Jesus went through in this week, and we're so glad to remember this and celebrate it with you this week online. This past Sunday was Palm Sunday, and Palm Sunday through the week of Easter represents the Passion Week. On Palm Sunday, we remembered the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, and he was so well received. The people were putting their clothes down for his donkey to step upon and laying down palm branches, shouting, "Hosanna, the Messiah is here, save now." That's what Hosanna means. And how things changed. I believe there was really a superficial acceptance of who Jesus was at that time. And within the end of the week, their attitude really changed. But that starts off this Passion Week. And it goes Monday up to Friday. And we'll talk about Friday here toward the end. But I believe Dustin's going to talk to you about the next few days.
Yeah. We often hit the big celebratory days, Palm Sunday on Sunday, the Last Supper Thursday, and then the crucifixion, of course, on Friday. But there is a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on in there too. And so let's just talk a bit about what goes on those days. So Jesus stayed outside of Jerusalem each night. So each day of the week he would come into Jerusalem from the town of Bethany where he was staying. So Monday comes, Monday morning, everybody's kind of a buzz. You know, what's going to happen today? Jesus just came in Sunday into Jerusalem, big triumph, kind of like a kingly presentation. And so the question on everybody's lips is, what's going to happen today? So two big things that happened on Monday. One, as Jesus was traveling back into Jerusalem, he came across a fig tree, and the story says in the gospel says that Jesus was hungry, and this fig tree was bright with leaves and should have been bearing fruit. And so as he approaches this fig tree, he gets to it, and there are no figs on it, and so he curses that fig tree. We often think, well, what's up with that? I mean, what's the significance of that? There's a couple things we can point out. Is first of all, whenever you think or see any of Jesus' miracles happening, it always seemed to be healing. It always seemed to be Jesus making something better. I mean, even water into wine for the wedding seemed better. And healing those that were lame, healing the blind. You know, every act that Jesus did, it was always something, taking something bad and making it better. This is the one time that we see that Jesus is cursing this fig tree, and as we'll see on Tuesday, the results of that. But often in the Old Testament, the Israelites were referred to as an olive tree, and so this is kind of a symbolic judgment on Israel, looking at them and saying, hey, it's a fruitful, looks like they should be bearing fruit, but yet they're not. And after all, Israel's purpose was to be a light to the world, to be salt to the world, to show the world what God's people would look like, and Israel was failing to do that. And so as Jesus enters into Jerusalem, the next thing he does is he goes to the temple, and we have the second cleansing of the temple event. Jesus goes back in, and he's turning over money changers' tables and the merchants that were there. And the significance being is this: these people were crowding around. The Passover week was underway. They were getting prepared for that, and so people during Passover needed sacrificial lambs. They needed to change their currency because they were traveling from all over the world, and so this was an important thing. And yet it was taking up the Gentile court, which in the temple was the area where the Gentiles were allowed to worship God. Those from the world outside of ethnic Israel were allowed to worship God. And so this big commerce thing was going on in that court. And so Jesus disrupted their commerce for the week, which might have, gotten the business people maybe on his bad side a little bit. But the significantly thinking about it, this was, again, as Israel's supposed to be a light to the world, and at this time, them crowding this court, they're basically holding the world back from worshiping God, from coming to God. And so Jesus cleanses the temple for the second time in his ministry. Again, that night, Jesus retreats back out to Bethany and stays the evening out there. Then comes Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning, Jesus teaches about the fig tree. As they're walking back into Jerusalem, the disciples are like, whoa, there's that fig tree, and it's all shriveled up and dead. And so Jesus takes a moment to speak on faith and telling the disciples of the great things that they would be able to do through faith in God. And then they continued on into Jerusalem, back into the temple. Now that it was a bit cleared out, Jesus had room to teach, and that's what a lot of the regular daily routine of Jesus was to sit down and teach in the temple. But here we have, on this Tuesday, we have quite a bit of controversy in the temple. So you'll see different groups coming up to Jesus. So if you can try to picture with me, you have Jesus sitting there talking to a group of people, and of course the religious leaders have their free reign in the temple because they're in charge, and so they make their way to the front, and they want to know, by whose authority Jesus is doing this. This is their first question. Who said you could do this? Who gave you permission to do what you're doing, to enter the city in the way you did, to throw people out of the temple the way you did? Who's giving you authority? And what we will see is these religious groups and political groups will be trying to catch Jesus. They're trying to find something to pin on him, to make him a criminal. And so Jesus simply replies to this question with another question. He says, where did the baptism of John come from? Referring to John the Baptist and how he baptized people in repentance. And he put them in a tough spot because he asked if did it come from God or did it come from man? And so they had two options. But they knew that if they answered that it came from God, then Jesus would say, why didn't you believe him? Why didn't you follow John then? But if they answered, well, it was from man, they feared the people, and the people saw John the Baptist as a prophet. And so this question temporarily silenced them. You can almost imagine them fading back into the crowd and trying to regroup and, okay, now what do we do? And you see this group, the next group that seems to come forward is the Pharisees. And as Jesus is teaching there, the Pharisees are the ones that have the zeal for keeping the law. They want to know, they want to keep the law. They want everybody to keep the law. They're also opposed to the authority of Rome because it's really hindered their Jewish lifestyle. And so you see these Pharisees coming forward, and Jesus teaches in several parables. He tells 3 different parables, one about 2 sons. The father asking the sons to go work in the field. He asks the first son, hey, will you go work in the field? The first son says no. But later on, the first son comes back and says, okay, I'll go work in the field. And he goes to the second son, he says, will you go work in the field? And the son says yes, but he never goes and works in the field. All right, then he gives this parable about a man who owns a vineyard, and he rents it out to these tenants. And in time, the owner of the vineyard sends his servants to collect from the tenants, and the tenants beat the servants, send them back. And finally, the owner decides, I'm going to send my son, my only son, and they'll respect him. And the tenants, when they see the son coming, devise against him and decide to kill him so that they would inherit the vineyard. And then another parable, he talks about a wedding feast and how the invitations go out to those people, but those people refuse it, so the invitation goes out to everybody, anybody who would willingly come. And so it's obvious the Pharisees see this, and possibly the crowd sees it as Jesus insulting the Pharisees, Jesus accusing the Pharisees of being the ones that are the wicked tenants, that are being the ones that aren't doing what God wanted them to do. And so they kind of fade again back into the crowd. But then they send a group called the Herodians. Now the Herodians were a group that were loyal to King Herod. King Herod was appointed by Caesar to rule over Israel. And so as they were they're more political. They were faithful to Herod. They wanted to see Herod's family, Herod's dynasty rule for a long time. And so they challenged Jesus with a political question. They said, "Hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar? He's a foreign ruler. We don't like foreign rulers. Should we pay taxes to Caesar?" And of course, they're trying to trap him. And so if Jesus says, "No, don't pay your taxes to Caesar," well, they can accuse him of being a rebel against Caesar. But if he says yes, then it might dash some of the hopes of some of the people of him being the Messiah. And so instead, Jesus takes the coin and says, "Hey, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." And so in that way, the Herodians kind of back off again into the crowd. Jesus continues to teach. Then you see the Sadducees. The Sadducees come forward, another group of religious liberals that denied the resurrection of the dead, that denied the angels and spirits. And Pastor Steve actually preached on this a week or two ago and talked a bit about this passage. And they came to him with a theological question. They're like, we're gonna trip him up theologically. And they ask, what happens in the resurrection? And Jesus' response is a great response. He ends up scathingly saying to them, "You don't know God's word and you don't know God's power." And so the Sadducees are kind of taken back. After each of these, you see either the people that are listening, it says they were amazed, or they were silenced. The Pharisees then saw that he silenced the Sadducees. Sadducees were guys that knew God's word. They had memorized the Pentateuch and books of the Bible, and so they knew the law of God. So the Pharisees come back with a lawyer, and they say, and when we say lawyer, we're talking about somebody who knows the law of God, the Old Testament, especially the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. And he asked a question to Jesus. He said, "Which is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus explains to him that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And he goes on to say, the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And this lawyer basically says to him, you've answered correctly. You hit the nail on the head. And you could almost see the Pharisees pulling that guy back, saying, "Hey, you know what, enough with you, you're not helping." Push him back in the crowd. But at that time, it says that they didn't ask him any more questions. So Jesus continued to reject them, continued to befuddle them with their own questions. And so at this time, we see them, Jesus once again teaching through the day on Tuesday, and then he retreats again back to Bethany for the evening. And then you have Wednesday, which is today. So what was Jesus doing nearly 2,000 years ago today? We don't know a whole lot about Wednesday. There's not a lot spoken about what happened on Wednesday. What we do think went on was, we do know that the religious leaders, Pharisees, Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, got together and they all decided they needed to do something about Jesus, which is a miracle in and of itself. To make a comparison, it would be like the Democrats, the Republicans, and the president getting together to decide to do something together. All right, so Jesus had taken these guys that were normally enemies of each other, got them together, and now they're trying to decide, what do we do with this Jesus? And so they go through a discussion of, okay, we need to get rid of this guy. How do we do it? And so they debate Wednesday, how do we go about doing this? And they came up with a plan. Their plan was this: we will wait till next week. Next week, after the Passover week celebration is over, after all these people who are visiting Jerusalem go home, so that we don't have a riot, we'll go after him next week. That was their plan. They initially decided they would wait till next Thursday to start going after Jesus, find out a way to kill him. Okay, and so this was their plan going into Wednesday, and then Judas walks in the room, apparently. And that's when they get their plan together with Judas. Things change. God changes things to the way he wants things to go. And so as we're here on Wednesday, just think of it this way. Tonight, as you're going to bed, this is actually the last night that Jesus got a full night's, or Jesus had any night's sleep before he was crucified. Thursday night, we know he was up all night in trial and everything. So as we go to bed this evening, what do you think was going through his head? How much sleep do you think he did get? But that's Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the Passion Week.
Mm-hmm. And that takes us up to Thursday, which would be tomorrow. And on Thursday, we remember Jesus having his last meal, his last supper with his disciples, his followers. And it's in that last meal where he is trying to tell them symbolically what's going to happen the next day. He says in that meal, take and eat. This is my body that's broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Also, he takes the cup and says, as oft as you drink this, do this in remembrance of me. And he's setting up one of the ordinances of the local church that we follow. Two ordinances, baptism and Lord's Supper or communion. And so in this Last Supper with the disciples, Jesus is foretelling what's going to happen the next day. And I'm not sure exactly how much the disciples understood exactly about what he was trying to tell them. After the supper, Jesus goes out for a time of prayer with the Father. He goes into the Garden of Gethsemane. He's praying with the Father, and it's during that time where Jesus is asking the Father that if it would be possible to let this cup pass from him. And we don't think that this cup that he's talking about is the cup necessarily of suffering, but perhaps it's the cup of being separated from the Father. He's never had that happen before. And he and the Father were one. And so we see an angel of the Lord appearing there and strengthening him. And then here comes Judas. This plan has been enacted. God is in sovereign control of everything that's going on. And Jesus is arrested. His disciples scatter. And then Jesus goes through a time of trial. He endures 6 trials, and 3 Roman and 3 Jewish trials. And this leads up to the crucifixion on Friday. And it is our plan on Friday to have a Good Friday service or a sermonette here prepared for you. So we encourage you that you would stop and just think about what's going on during this Passion Week of Jesus. This strong desire and strong suffering that he is willingly going into for you and for me. This is not something we deserve. We are recipients of this amazing grace that he has bestowed upon us. But this week is necessary. In fact, this is the most pivotal week in all of human history. And we are looking forward to the Good Friday service as well as, of course, Easter Sunday. So I encourage you spend time with the Lord. In our Bible reading together at Slate Belt Church, we've been reading through the book of Luke, and it's talking exactly about the events that are happening in this Passion Week. In fact, this week, or today, we've read in Luke about what's happening with the Lord Jesus in his death, the trial, his death, and into his resurrection. And so I would encourage you to get alone with God, thank him for what he's done, but also just contemplate the weight of the great cost of our sin, what it truly cost the creator of the universe to be in relationship with us, all of which he has initiated on our behalf.